Hi, I'm presenting on the article Assessing Lexical Proficiency Using Analytic Ratings, a Case for Collocation Accuracy. I chose this article because I am interested in measuring lexical proficiency, and also the article talked about analytic and holistic ratings, and that's a topic in our course. Here is the guide that lists the learning objectives from this presentation. And I have some questions here for you to fill out as you read the article to help the presentation make more sense. But I thought maybe you would like to see my answers to these. I'm sure that you've got this, but the theory behind lexical knowledge with two dimensions is both breadth, the size of the vocabulary knowledge, the size of the number of vocabulary words you know, and also depth, the relationships. I think you do need to know lots of words and when to use them and how to use them, so that makes sense to me. These were the 9 measures used in the study. These are the definitions I came up with in examples, and I labeled them breadth and depth. Just as a way to kind of better understand the concepts in the research. Basic category word, a word that's not too broad or too specific. For instance, flower is between plant and rose. Word specificity, the best word for the context. For example, if I was talking to a gardener, I might be specific and say I planted knockout roses. Word concreteness, this is like concrete versus abstract. Words that are concrete can be perceived by the senses. A good prototypical example would be book. Semantic co-referentiality are words that are related in meaning, but that don't share the same stem or root. My example is book and chapter. Collocation accuracy, words often occur together frequently. Some words go together more frequently than others. Like we could say strong coffee or weak tea, but we would say like a powerful car or a fast car. We wouldn't really say a strong car. And there's no reason we couldn't. It's adjective, noun, but there are certain adjectives that go with certain nouns. And this happens also, there are certain subjects that go with certain verbs, like the results showed in academic language. Sense relationships are the different shades of meaning. In academia, the chair of the department's my boss, and it's also a verb. You can chair a committee. Sense frequency is the most common meaning, which of course for chair would be the place to sit. Word frequency is the number of times a word is used. This seems to make a lot of sense because if you're using fancier words, it probably means you have a larger vocabulary, you're more proficient. Lexical diversity is repetition within the text, repetition or lack thereof. I had a non-native speaker who often used this guy for any noun. He would say this guy, even to describe like fractions or formula, parts of a formula. And if you keep saying this guy, repeatedly, that kind of makes it sound like you don't have a big vocabulary. I then asked you to rate which ones you thought were valuable. For me, I care about lexical diversity, and because I think that if you use a lot of different words in your speech, that shows a lot of proficiency. And similar to that would be word frequency. If you use fancier words like delicious instead of good, that would be awesome. I put collocations next because that kind of goes with frequency, things that frequently go together. Specificity and category, that's using the right word, knowing what level of specificity you use, followed by the other ones. Dead last, I put word concreteness because I think that reflects more the topic that you're talking about. If you're writing about or speaking about abstract things, you're going to use fewer concrete words. So that's what I thought. I'd be interested to know what you thought, and hopefully we can talk about that on a little bit. So for my infographic, I started with background information, showing, to me, this represents breadth of knowledge of lexical proficiency, representing how many words you have in your mental dictionary. And then here, this would be how you categorize them. Do you know which words go together in collocations and things like that? The difficult thing is it's in the field, it's unclear how we can measure these theoretical constructs, and we can only measure them by performance, right? What learners write or speak. And some performance measures might reflect both of these constructs. So there's lots of questions in this area. And the other term to make sure that we have the background information for are ratings, and this is when expert raters make a judgment. This could be holistic, meaning you give the language sample one score, like, oh, this is a 4 out of 5. Or you could have an analytic score, which means you think of all the different components that you want to assess, like maybe the grammar is a 5, but the vocabulary is only a 3, and maybe the spelling is a 2, and you can give each component a different score. So the researchers wanted to answer what is the relationship between the holistic and analytic scores of lexical proficiency with expert human raters. So how did they do that? Well, let's just look at what they did. Looking at the data, they used learner data of written essays that were unprepared, and they also had speech samples, 180 of those, and they wanted to also include native English speakers' speeches and text, so for a comparison. So for their rating instrument, the holistic rating went from a 1 to 5, and the analytic, each of the 9 categories could be rated a 1 through 6. Now, who were the raters? They were trained English grad students, and there were 3 of them. And because there were 3 of them, the researchers had to average the score for each language sample. For instance, if rater A gave this language sample a 3, and rater B gave it a 2, and rater C gave it a 4, it would have an average of 3. So they had to do that especially for the holistic. So then it's easier to understand with the holistic. But they also the raters gave each of the language samples an analytic, a score for each of the 9 categories from 1 through 6. And since there were 3 of them and there were 9 categories, 1 through 6, there were so many numbers, the researchers wanted to figure out which of these categories did the raters seem to be able to agree on. Like if rater A thought it was a 4, did rater B and C also think it was a 4, or was there a lot of disagreement? So they determined the inter-rater reliability, which scores seemed to be a lot of agreement. And then they used only of these 9, only the ones that had a lot of agreement, the highest agreement, did they then find the relationship with the holistic scores, which was the question. And they also then used those as the variables in the model, the linear regression model, to figure out the importance of each. So if this pie chart represents the holistic score, which of the analytic categories influenced or makes up that holistic score? Okay, so what were the results? So for the correlations, the top 4 were collocation accuracy, lexical diversity, word frequency, and word concreteness. And correlations go from 0, meaning there's no relationship at all, to 1, meaning a perfect relationship. If you absolutely know the collocation accuracy, you can predict with 100% accuracy the holistic score. It's not at 100%, but it's really close. 0.9, higher than 0.9 is a really high correlation in research. If you remember, I'm interested in lexical diversity and word frequency, and those also highly correlated with the holistic score. So if you measured this, if you got this measure, you'd probably be able to guess what the holistic score the raters gave it. And that fourth one, word concreteness, that was one I was really surprised about. I didn't think that to me, that wouldn't be an important category to measure. So what is the implication? Well, collocation accuracy seems to be really a big part of lexical proficiency for these 3 raters. But we really don't have a great way to measure or define collocation accuracy, and there's no way to do it computerized. So if we want to use collocation accuracy as a measure of lexical proficiency, we'd always need to use expert raters sitting there rating each one. Also, when they did the variance, you can see that collocation accuracy explained a lot of the variance in both the written and the spoken text, followed by lexical diversity, word frequency, and concreteness. So again, that means that the raters, when they gave a holistic rating, that was really, really swayed by accurate collocation use. More variety in the speech, the use of less frequent words and the use of less concrete words. Or to say that another way, that seems to be whatever you gave the collocation accuracy, the raters seem to also want to give the holistic score. Now, the researchers then wanted to say, well, now that we found out what the correlations are with the holistic score and the variance explained, maybe these could be really good measures. Let's now compare what low proficiency English learners with native speakers, L1 learners, to see if that reflects a difference, right? You would think the native speakers have high lexical proficiency versus beginner L2s, so will we see a big difference? And we do see a big difference. Unsurprisingly, native speakers maxed out on the holistic score, maxed out on the collocation score, had high diversity and frequency, and the L2 learners were lower. So they're saying maybe these are good measures. But I do have some concerns. One concern that I have is the idea of measuring collocation accuracy. As I said, that I just don't, this was what surprised me about it is that I'm just not sure how I would measure that consistently or reliably. Does it really measure lexical proficiency or just native-like, right, to know the collocations? Also, part of collocations are phrasal verbs, and phrasal verbs do show that you know what words go together, but they also tend to be informal. So is that really higher proficiency to have informal language? Speaking of formal versus informal language, this research was text and speech, and they found basically the same results, but I do question that because should we have the same expectations for written language and spoken language? I'm not sure. And I'm also wondering about if the results are influenced by the context. Would we want to use these same measures or for children learning a second language, or would they be valid? A big question that I have for you is, how does this inform our teaching? Does this mean we should teach more collocations, especially if higher proficiency, so that they can seem more proficient, or if they're adult learners, maybe that's just limited? And I also had some concerns about the rating instrument. An analytic rubric with 9 categories is just too many to assess. It's hard to keep that many categories in your head as you're rating, as you read an essay or listen to a speech. It's just really hard. Usually it's limited to like 4 to 6 or so. Also, remember that there were 9 measures, 9 categories, but only 4 of them they focused on because the other 5 had low inter-rater reliability. There was a lot of variability for those measures. So that kind of means that some people were measuring apples to oranges, right? They couldn't really agree on what that score was. And I wonder if those trained raters would differ from language teachers. Would language teachers give different scores for those? The fact that the L1 ratings were at the top means that those scores didn't differentiate between L1 proficiency differences or quality of differences. Is that a problem? And I wanted to ask you, what categories in your rubrics drive the score that you give the student? Think about it.